The Griffins learned that a wrestler named Charles Yamamoto was on a world tour, and he had recently hosted an eating competition in Quahog. Anyone interested in competing had to bring $50 and a big appetite. Chris enthusiastically encouraged Peter to enter, but Peter was concerned about his physique, so he suggested Chris participate instead. With the contest approaching, Peter, Brian, Chris and Stewie headed to the attic to rummage through Peter's old belongings in search of items that might inspire Chris for the competition. While sorting through the old items, Brian found a monstrous painting that he found bizarrely captivating and ended up buying it from Peter for $50. Peter decided that he would help Chris prepare for the eating competition by waking up at the crack of dawn every day for practice sessions. However, Peter wasn't exactly a morning person, making this new routine a struggle for him. One morning, when Stewie woke up, he nearly jumped out of his crib in terror after noticing the monstrous painting Brian had bought, now hanging ominously on the wall. Later that day, while Brian and Stewie went to a convenience store to buy lottery tickets, Stewie was horrified to see the same grotesque face from the painting on a scratch-off ticket. Disturbed and increasingly paranoid, Stewie started seeing the monstrous figure everywhere, even on his bedroom wall. Meanwhile, the hot dog eating contest finally arrived, and Chris found himself neck and neck with Charles Yamamoto, furiously consuming hot dogs to break the record. With Peter's vocal encouragement, Chris gave his best effort and managed to surpass Charles's record, winning the contest. However, the victory came at a price. Soon after returning home, Chris began to experience severe stomach pain. Lois, unimpressed by Peter's involvement, reprimanded him for allowing Chris to overindulge. She was determined to send Chris to a weight loss camp to help him take responsibility for his health. And as a challenge to Peter, she also signed him up for the camp. At the weight loss camp, the boys were awakened before dawn and quickly thrown into a series of intense activities. The first night around the campfire, Peter attempted to entertain the group with horror stories, though he managed to keep the campers more interested by describing tantalizing food instead. The next day, Peter and Chris embarked on a hiking trek, but Chris's lack of stamina soon became apparent, and he tired quickly. Just as they were catching their breath, they stumbled upon something horrifying in the forest, the battered body of a child who appeared to have been strangled. Joe and other police officers arrived to investigate the grim scene, only to uncover a disturbing lead. During the investigation, Peter received a frantic call from Lois, who informed him that Patrick, a known suspect, had shown up at their home. Alarmed for his family's safety, Peter rushed back, fearing that his loved ones were in grave danger. As soon as Peter and Joe arrived at the Griffin's house, Joe pulled out his gun and arrested Patrick on suspicion of murder. It was soon revealed that Patrick had recently escaped from an insane asylum. However, Patrick insisted he had been freed by a middle-aged man who visited the asylum. Just then, Peter received another distressing call from the camp manager, reporting that yet another child had been strangled at the campgrounds, suggesting that Patrick couldn't be the killer. Returning to the camp, Peter and Patrick joined Joe and the police as they continued their investigation. Analyzing the clues, Patrick speculated that the murderer might be targeting Chris, much to Peter's horror. That night, as Chris slept in his room, an ominous figure appeared, bent on strangling him. The attacker was none other than Charles Yamamoto, who, consumed by jealousy over Chris breaking his record, had been killing children in an attempt to sabotage Chris. Just as Charles moved to attack Chris, Stewie sprang into action. In a moment of quick thinking, he held up the monstrous painting, which Charles recognized with horror. The shocking image triggered a heart attack in Charles, who collapsed and died on the spot. In the aftermath, Patrick revealed that it was Charles who had released him from the asylum, intending to frame Patrick for the string of murders. Joe, realizing that Charles had used Patrick as a scapegoat, was prepared to close the case. But before he could officially take Patrick back into custody, Patrick made a swift escape. Fearing the consequences for losing a prisoner, Joe concocted a plan to cover it up, asking Peter to punch him to make it look like they had struggled before Patrick's escape.